Welcome to Uncaged. Today we're speaking with Oren Young. Oren, it's great to have you on the show. I'm excited to talk to you today. Oren really covers off an area that I feel sometimes doesn't, I'll say it openly, gets short shrift. It doesn't get a lot of focus, but it's literally the lifeblood of companies. Oren is an expert on operations. He's an expert on performance for businesses. He is at Province, the Province firm today. He's the head of operations and performance improvement. And we'll talk more about how companies can really be as efficient as possible, how they can restructure for growth, accelerated growth, how they can make some of those decisions that sometimes feel impossible, but are actually critical, maybe how they can even see some of those things. And so Oren is going to take us through a little bit of what are best practices. But before we get there, Oren, tell us a little bit about you and your career.
Yeah, well, thanks. I cut my teeth mostly in Fortune, call it 100 companies, and I kind of learned some of the best practices along the way at General Mills and companies like Mars, and in various roles. But most of my time has been spent. I'm your lowly CPA, but I was always a little bit of a weird CPA because I'd never really stuck into the accounting as much. I really wanted to be in decision support and really wanted to help the organization to become more operationally effective at the end of the
Right.
day. And a lot of my career all through, if you kind of look at my CV and go through it, has all been in, how to make processes better, more efficient, how to bring new data, new ways to slice and dice data to kind of help organizations or help the teams I was on better. And so I spent about 10 years, 12 years actually, sorry, at General Mills in Canada. And there I spent most of my time in all various roles. So I supported sales, I supported marketing, I supported trade, I supported supply chain. And that was actually my first role right out of, big time out of college was
Wow.
really logistics analyst. So, think about logistics and the complexities behind
Oh,
all of
yeah.
that. And then, into Mars. And there I would kind of became, they call them co-pilots, or like you call a CFO of a business, and it was a digital business. So then I got touched on the digital commerce aspect of things and really, changed the trajectory of that business, which, for a long time was planning and planning and planning for demand and planning for demand that was never coming in, and always had access, supply, and capacity. And thus it affected the P&L. And, I try to change the mindset of like, let's staff to the lowest common denominator and then have an ability to flex up. And that was kind of like flipping the thing switch on its head. It was like they were staffed for 20% growth, when in reality they should staff for, no growth and then be able to flex up. And when we did
Yeah.
that, we became much more efficient as a business, just as an example. And then my last role before Province, I really was the president and general manager of their super premium chocolate division, which was that was actually my first role, taking the helm of pretty much everything, and really getting a flavor. And my biggest learning was around marketing. And as a data and an efficiency guy, marketing was always a challenge for me because you've got to put it into the metrics, and it's very hard to link your marketing spend to a dollar revenue, as we all probably know. And that was the biggest learning for me. But from there, turned that business around, doubled it in size, and so was super excited about that. And then, consulting has always been an interesting spot for me. And I felt one of the things I always, as I came into roles and left roles, was I made a change. I tried something different and then handed it off to somebody else. And consulting kind of gives you that opportunity.
Right.
So when I joined Province, I had to learn the restructuring side of our business and different things, which I'd never dealt with before. And the interesting thing is, one of the reasons for my current role is part of it is, and I'll talk about, like, there's kind of a split. I got a split personality. I kind of do some client facing and some internal stuff, but getting out in front of clients, you start to see that, like, not all companies are ran like a Fortune 100 company, and
Right.
don't have the same process, don't have the same rigor. and that was like aha moment for me. It's like, I can
Yeah.
really help make a change in some of these companies,
Yeah.
bring some of these things to those companies, including our own. We're a, relatively new firm. I mean, we've been around for 10, 15 years, but we really have grown in the last 5 years.
Tell me a little bit, Oren, just to kind of set the
Yeah.
listeners kind of mind frame on this whole thing. Province, tell us a little bit about kind of what the company has traditionally focused on and really kind of some of the areas that the business is growing into.
Yeah, I mean, so Province is, nationally recognized, financial advisory firm, I like to call it, even though primarily known as a restructuring firm. Think finance, think high finance. We have, lawyers, accountants, investment banker types. And I think that's a skill set we all need in this, because we're like, I like to consider us like, when a company's really, kind of having some struggles, we're like the Navy SEALs, and we go in and we take it out. We're very specific. We drop in and we want to
Yeah.
get out. That's kind of who we are. But we operate in 5 business lines, and it's corporate advisory, which is, think about advising, a board, advising you know a debtor in a bankruptcy. Then
Hmm.
you got advisory to the creditor committees.
Hmm.
So that could be advising an unsecured creditor committee. That could be advising a bank on their loan, or a PE
Hmm.
firm on an investment they have. Um, then you can kind of move into litigation services, and that's just kind of a very unique one. And actually, I've written expert reports now that I've kind of come into it, and where you're actually, people are fighting, and you're supporting the lawyers by putting words on paper to kind of say, like, look, here's the value of this company, or
Right.
here's how you cost account correctly, and this is why that this person has been defrauded of their investment,
Right.
etc. And then there's the trust aspect, which is post coming out of a restructuring. There's usually a trust that you have to pay claims out to people.
Hmm.
That's a smaller piece of our business, but very important piece. But then the area that I'm kind of primarily involved in, for the most part, is usually corporate advisory, or into what we call performance improvement. And that's not so much restructuring and distressed assets, or companies. This is kind of
Hmm.
swimming up the stream of the life cycle of a company. It could be at the beginning, like a
Hmm.
venture capital company that needs just some rigor and institutionalization of its processes. Or it could be a company that's been around for a while, that just, maybe the board or the management team doesn't have the command, or doesn't want to come in and institute some of the changes that they know that are needed. So you're kind of that third party, kind of coming in undercover and helping
Hmm.
them instigate that change.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of a area I kind of head up right now. And so, like, I've done everything from, I'm as a special advisor to a board, which then turned into an interim CFO gig, because I needed to reorganize the finance department, right? And you need to get
Hmm.
in there and change that, to just getting in there and looking at the operations and giving tools, just saying,
Yeah.
hey, like, you don't have these tools, like, you don't have a daily operations dashboard, like, why don't you have that? How can we help you do that? Like, some of this stuff seems simple, but it's getting the collective behind it, right?
Yeah,
And
and
then,
sometimes it's just having the resources and the scale to get there. And sometimes it's really just having an outside party like yours coming in and reframing it for them so that they know what they need, right?
yeah, no, it's, look, I back in my early days of my life, I had my pilot's license. And
Hmm.
I mean, I still have my pilot's license. I'm not current. How about that?
Right.
And one of the things that I always kind of take to, and I use this with clients even today, is when you're in an emergency, and in some cases you're not necessarily in an emergency in business, but say when you're flying, there's 3 rules, and it's very simple. And I take that to business. It's
Hmm.
aviate, navigate, communicate, and it's in that order, right? And people too often want to build great, grandiose strategy, right? So that's the navigate part, but yet they're
Hmm.
not flying straight and level, right? They don't know where they
Right.
are. And so you really got to set the foundation. And I think a lot of companies, what I see, do one of these things bad, right? So they have this great strategy, they have great foundational, but they don't communicate to anybody. So
Right.
it's tough to get people behind them. Or they have a great strategy, but not a good business model set up yet. So they haven't
Right.
aviated, they're not flying the plane. And then when they fly the plane, sometimes they don't even have strategy. They're like entrepreneurs. I see this
Right.
classic, right? I'm an entrepreneur. I'm just making money. Well, how do you know you're making money? Because our sales are going up. Are you sure you're actually making money?
Right.
I've gone into companies before and I've talked to them about EBITDA. And you're probably like, I know what EBITDA is.
Right.
Well, not everybody knows what EBITDA is. Never
Right.
assume. That's the biggest thing I've learned in this job is that you can't assume that people know stuff that you and I probably take for granted.
Yeah, I know I was talking to an entrepreneur the other day and they were giving me the same spiel of how they were making so much money. And I I was looking at the P&L and L and I was like, No, you're not. And kind of trying to explain it, and it's tricky. Also, I mean, I think for me, one of the things that companies struggle with is cash flow, obviously, cash flow
Mhm.
and understanding how to make sure that a business is healthy. It's different when you're like a Fortune 500 business, but for small to medium-sized businesses, man, if you don't get that right, that can be a kiss of death, really, for you. All the things that you're talking about are absolutely critical. But I find, Oren, that problems sometimes come in waves. Like,
Mhm.
customers kind of focus on certain things collectively almost. And I don't know, maybe it's things happen in the media, et cetera. I'm curious what you're seeing out there from your customers these days. What are some of the big themes that you're hearing about, that they're concerned about?
Cash. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, cash is definitely one of them. I think, allowance for bad debts. I think people are concerned about, if the economy is starting to slow down, are they going to be able to collect? And then on top of that, so when you think about cash and the cash availability, one of the big things we're seeing in a big way is look, interest rates. I mean, they're
Hmm.
not what they were. So imagine now you're at a business that say makes 10 points of margin, right? So you're great. It's
Hmm.
not the best, but it's making money for you.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden you have, a line of credit that's outstanding and you're paying it down, but you're still got to pay some portion of interest. And that interest rate was at one point maybe 2.5%, 3%. So now your margins eroded. So your business model is no longer there. And
Yeah.
so people got to be very wary of that. I think, obviously the markets look like it's pricing in probably a discount from the Fed coming up over the next year, but it's not going to be, back to where it was, the heyday of, 2 years ago, when the interest rates
Yeah.
were small, and that squeeze goes down to the consumer, right? So that's where I kind of come to. It's like your consumer, well, mortgage prices have gone up and their lending costs have gone up and inflation on items. So I think those are the things that, the two things I'm really seeing. So how can organizations become, you know, kind of you know taking care of that or be thinking ahead of that, and like if you need to make more margin, how do you do that besides just taking pricing? If you're already in an inflationary environment, that that your customers say sensitive to price now, because I think
Right.
most people are becoming sensitive to inflation. You and I go to the grocery store, you see it. I mean, it's just there. I mean, and so that's the thing that companies need to be wary of, I think, going forward. So they need to set their operations up successfully. But look, there's some cool stuff out there, right? If you can build your strategy and invest around AI, if you
Yeah.
can invest around good systems to actually automate, or even to a certain degree, reduce your work, headcount overall. I mean, I think those are things. Then you can take that margin back and then you can probably refinance your loan and be in a better spot. But if you're not thinking about that now, it's getting late.
No, it's a really, really good point. And I mean, I know that you play this kind of dual role, Oren, because you get to kind of figure out the operations for province, but at the same time, you get to do it with some of the customers, and you have the team that's driving performance improvement for customers. It's a great challenge, but I mean, on the performance side, do you find that technology is something that people are especially things like artificial intelligence, are they embracing it? Are your clients embracing it to say, oh yeah, this can drive more efficiencies?
I would say the sad reality is not as much as I would have thought.
Mm,
Um, and I still think it's new, to be fair to
Yeah.
people, but I don't see it on, like, so I call, usually when I come into a company, I try to say, okay, where's your OGSM? And people are like, what is that? But that's like objectives, goals, strategies, and
Yeah.
measures, right? Your 5-year
Hmm.
plan. Like, show me that. I want to see this document. And if not, I'm going to help you create it.
Hmm.
And I don't see it a lot on the docket, right? Where it's like invest in technology that automates things, right? Because I think
Hmm.
that's where AI is really going to play a role
Right.
in some of this. So I'm not seeing as much as I would have thought. And I think that's probably because it's new, and depending on the company and how much money you have to invest in this technology.
Yeah.
But it's not as expensive as people think.
Right.
These programs are out there, even GPT, which probably
Right.
your kids use, and I use. I was great. My kid is at in a hockey team, and they were like, let's design a logo, and all of a sudden there was like 50 logos that were done like a professional artist within like an hour. It was
Right.
insane. That type of change, like, imagine that they'll go into a graphic artist, then
Right.
deciding. We had 50 logos to choose from in a matter of like 60 minutes, and
Yeah.
that type of change is going to happen. Whether you want to be at the forefront of it or behind it.
No, I mean, I think it's probably also the scale of businesses. I mean, I think some of the, what I'm seeing out there is the big companies will have siloed projects right now that are embracing aspects of this, but they're not truly kind of putting it at the center of their operations. They're doing what they've done with any new technology. They, trial it and move it forward. We'll see if that works. I think there's probably a bigger operational discussion that needs to be had at some point with some of these things. I often think about, you just talked about the logo thing. So what do you do with those young designers that join a company, right? I mean, originally they would have probably been tasked with knocking out those 40 things. It doesn't mean that we don't need designers, but the role of that person shifts, right? In some ways, the things that they're going to be expected to do are more of what we would expect from a veteran in a way than of a junior, designer. And, how do you teach them those skills earlier and faster? How do you get that real experience? It's going to be a fascinating moment, and certainly it will shift performance. And now I kind of see, Oren, why you get so excited about what you're doing. I mean, it's really, really quite cool stuff. But let me ask you, I mean, I love the fact that you were a pilot, and maybe it's from those pilot days. You are clearly interested in kind of driving efficiencies and performance, but tell me a little bit about where that passion comes from for this.
All through my career, I would say I've always tried to look at process and flip it on its head and say, why do we do things this way? If you talk to, even going back to my father, I was a kid, and I was always the inquisitive nature,
Hmm.
period, and stop, right? It's like, he would sometimes lie to me about stuff because he just didn't know the answer. I'd be like, but why? And
Hmm.
I always, and I use this, and I go into a client, and sometimes it can be a little aggravating for them, but I'm like, but why? And I ask it 5 times till I get to
Hmm.
the root. And but I get passionate about it because I see so much opportunity. And when you see opportunity, you're like, wow, like, you can really make a difference. And I can tell you, as a consultant, it's sometimes not as gratifying, because sometimes you're seen as the guy coming in from the outside. Okay.
Hmm.
So sometimes you're not as appreciated. I mean, I think leadership does, but I think some of the people that you're trying to change, and sometimes it's not as always, fun and games, like to
Yeah.
say. But I can tell you, in like my last role, even at, Mars, running the business, I really made a difference that will leave a legacy behind in
Yeah.
that business. Now, I left it in good shape. Is the next person doing great and better things? Absolutely. But I'm okay with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I took it up two levels. Now the next person, they could take it up 6 levels. Outstanding.
Yeah.
And but you got to know too, when you end, like, when it's like, okay, I've taken this as far as I can go. And I
Hmm.
felt that in my last role, which is why I ended up joining Province. And I keep busy with the operations here and trying to institutionalize it and make us, easy to run business. But then I take that and I go out and I talk to the clients and I work with them. And I think that just, kind of split personality slash, all over the place. I actually like that, living a bit of
Right.
that and trying different things all the time, and
Yeah.
meeting people and changing culture. I think that's the other thing too that we didn't touch upon at all. But
Yeah.
culture is so important to enact change. And I learned that a lot more so as I became a senior leader in organizations,
Yeah.
than I did, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, I think you've hit on all of the issues that I see, but also kind of the opportunity. I mean, also just in the back of my mind, is now stuck this idea of aviate, navigate, and communicate. So
Simple, right?
I think you got something there. But Oren, here we are in 2024. Tell me a little bit about what's on the docket for Province and what do you see out there in the market?
Yeah, I mean, look, Province, loving what I'm doing right now, loving our business. Sometimes that's not a great thing for the economy, I guess, ultimately.
Hmm.
But we're planning to expand internationally,
Hmm.
which is great. The goal is to continue to grow out the performance improvement segment of our business to kind of round out our services. I think we're really good in the restructuring space. I think we want to continue to round that out. I see the restructuring business continuing to accelerate. And again, this is me being happy for our business, but obviously this means like companies are in distress, and that's
Hmm.
just due to exactly what I talked about. For the most part, it's just companies that don't have a great business model and probably have too many turns of debt, and they need
Yeah.
to then renegotiate the debt, and then they just can't afford it at that point, so they'll need to restructure.
Yeah.
But that's good for our business, and but because you end up with a better business coming out at the end of the day.
I also think, strangely enough, Oren, it's interesting for me to think about that because when a company like Province comes in those perhaps complicated and difficult scenarios, you're able to do a lot, you have to. It's the only way that things are going to move forward, right? And so it is kind of like that Occam's razor moment, right? Where, all those discussions that don't get made in a company when things are good, they
Yeah.
get made, right? They get made.
Yeah, sometimes our role allow us a lot of latitude to kind of, like I said, really make some real drastic changes quickly.
Mm,
Just to kind of, for those of you who don't understand the bankruptcy process, most people think these are terrible companies, and the answer is they're not.
yeah,
Especially in a Chapter 11 situation, they're just companies that have a catalyst that took them down. So, and sometimes there are bad business models, right?
yeah,
But forget about that for a second. Sometimes it's litigation,
yeah,
pending litigation on something that they got to take care of.
yep,
Sometimes it's debt being, over, but the actual underlying business is great. And one of the things you can do in Chapter 11, which is a very cool thing, is you can actually go back and renegotiate executory contracts, which
hmm,
a good example that would be leases. So you can actually go back to your landlord, say you're, thousand chain restaurant company, and there's like 200 leases that are just putting you underwater in these locations. Well, you can have a conversation, and the
yeah,
landlord can say no, or you can say no, and it
right,
just gives people an opportunity. So there are protections under the bankruptcy, act that really allow change quickly.
yeah,
The stuff I'm doing upstream in performance improvements not as drastic, but it requires the same type of mindset and skill that you need to come into it with, like a change mindset. Why do we do this way? Inquisitive, and being able to model things and kind of make
yeah,
decisions. So I think that it's just the speed it happens depends on where you are on the spectrum of
yeah,
distress, and but
exactly.
and the rules may change a bit. But
No,
yeah,
but I mean, I see the landscape, and certainly we are living in a moment where there is dynamic change in the market, and we'll see how this year progresses. I'm excited. I'm hoping that the economy continues to improve, and we see some positive change. But Oren, it's been great going through all of this stuff with you today. If someone wanted to reach you, where's the best place to find you?
yeah, I mean, they can go on our website, provincefirm.com, and look at our bios. They can click on mine, and you can email me, oyoung at provincefirm.com, is my email. You can reach me there. Happy to discuss any business needs that anybody wants, especially from a performance improvement standpoint. I don't mind sitting
Hmm.
and chatting with people for an hour. on it, because in my mind, it's just you pay it forward. And I'm a big believer in that, in terms of like having initial discussions. It's word of mouth, and it's how you make a difference in the world, and make new connections.
You heard it here. Oren Young offers a free hour.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
The second hour might be a little pricey.
Yeah, there we go. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. That's the truth.
Exactly. Well, Oren,
Thank you.
thank you so much for being on the Uncaged show today, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you. Take care.